Yeah, I'm Josh Nelson. I'm the Director of Applied Performance here at Baylor University. Today, what we're going to do is talk about some wellness metrics. More so than wellness metrics, we're going to talk about just athlete readiness and monitoring readiness. We are going to look at the 2019 Baylor baseball season as an example of that and what we did with them. So just a little bit of background. We started wellness metrics, GPS metrics, and a day log with Baylor baseball this year. The primary investigators were myself and Josh Ogden and Justin Grassi. So Josh Ogden is our athletic trainer. Justin Grassi is our director of operations. And myself, I served as a joint strength conditioning coach and applied performance, which is sports science. Okay. So we basically, just to outline of our week, what we did was we ran Catapult GPS on all of our position players. So 8 position players and 1 DH. Throughout the data, what we did was remove the DH from any team or positional averages except for the DH because of the confounding impact that not moving around as much in the defensive setting had on the data set. But we ran those guys with the Catapult GPS system every practice day and every game through the 2019 season. It stretched from January until June. Okay. Then what we did was look at wellness metrics. We took wellness metrics at the beginning of every week, which started Monday, and at the end of the practice week, as we were going into a series, which was Thursday. If a series moved forward or backwards, depending on a holiday, on like a Sunday, for example, Easter, all we did was shift the wellness metrics up one day, depending on whenever our lifts were. But basically, we lift as a team on Monday, Thursday. We took wellness metrics at breakfast or early morning. They were sent to our athletes and they completed those. So our week throughout a college baseball season typically starts on Monday, okay? Starts on Monday and then ends on Sunday. That's because of the 3-game series that exist Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you start a new game week on that Monday. So our weeks run Monday to Sunday. They do not start on Sunday, okay? And then the last thing what we did was look at a day log. So every single period of every single day throughout the year was evaluated and typed in to a spreadsheet to evaluate loading per period and loading over time. All right, we're going to share some screen and we'll kind of walk through this a little bit. All right, so we are right here. So looking at the Baylor baseball readiness report. So I'm just going to kind of drive through this really quickly and show how the functionality works. Okay, so this is the only thing that the coaches receive on any given day. They were given no specific GPS data. They were provided information through conversation regarding return to play. But this is the only thing that they received. They had one sheet, and it was really easy to kind of talk about and navigate what was going on. Okay, so just looking at this, we took the date, auto-populated right here. You can see the function right up top on how to do that. So you can really work to not have to input every single thing. Our athletes filled in here. They were in there every single day. This I will get to in just a second. That was our readiness based on 1 through 3. Our current body weight taken through the week, okay? And our body weight spring average. That was throughout the entire spring. So I thought a lot about how we were going to do this, whether we're going to look at a monthly average, a multiple week average, but what we did was just look at what was the average throughout the season, okay? Or throughout the spring, I should say. And then wellness, that scale is based on 5 to 25, lower being better. The closer to 5 we were here, the more ready in terms of wellness we were. Now, this was the most important section here, okay? This is where our intuition as a sports scientist, everything that we were doing was filtering to the coaches. So instead of giving them a GPS report or a report that really they did not spend any time looking at because they did not understand what all the numbers were, half the things that we don't understand, we put that and interpreted it for them here, okay? And then finally, we give them a readiness score over here, and I'm going to talk about that in just one second. Then down here, based on our wellness score, our coaches received this. They were educated on 5 to 25 scale, and they could see exactly where we were as a team in the overall score of the team in regard to this score, so an average. And then longitudinal season training volume with a player load over minute in the orange, which is an intensity volume or intensity measure, and our training volume, which is basically minutes times RPE. Okay, continuing to drive through here, this was our day log, and I have taken off information over here in the black from what we did, but basically you can see this is every single period throughout the entire year. Okay, this was practice, this was games. Over here, let's just look at from the top. Let's look at some of the metrics that we looked at. Obviously, like our date, segment was like preseason, non-conference, conference play, in-season, conference tournament play, and then NCAA tournament. We looked at location, ballpark, whether we were home or away, what we wore, what was the weather. Okay, later on down, once we started traveling a little bit, we looked at overall mode of travel, whether it was plane or a bus, and then mileage. We looked at the temperature, what the actual temperature was. We used weather underground for the consistent measure there, and it provided us a categorical value in regard to what the condition was. And we took the daily high and daily low. We measured whether it was a day, a twilight, or a night game or practice, whether we were indoors or outdoors. There were a couple practices early on in the season that we were indoors in the indoor football field. And there was a series that we played in Houston in Minute Maid Park in which they had the indoor, the roof closed. And what kind of surface were we on? We were looking at time on different surfaces. We play a lot of games on turf. Our field is natural surface, so we looked at that. And this phase was very similar to the segment, except it was just a little bit more specific. What our opponent was if it was a game, the overall result, runs scored and runs allowed. Okay, that looks at the Pythagorean theorem of winning and losing. So basically we were projecting out where we were throughout the year and looking at our success and how successful we were at, depending on how many runs we score and then how many runs we give up, we get a plot, and then we can actually see if we were on pace or we were underperforming. Okay, so that was a neat little thing there, and we just tracked that over time just for games. You can kind of see here. Then over here we tracked periods. So some examples of periods may be total session, training, warm-up, for baseball, infield, outfield, bunt defense, offensive, situational hitting, batting practice, or like a game, it may be like batting practice, in and out, hitters meeting, and then a game. We measured all that there in minutes. Average player load, we took that from Catapult GPS for the team minus the DH. And then we got an intensity. This was our A measure of volume. Average player load for the team minus the DH minus divided by the minutes was a measure of intensity. CRPE stands for coach rating of perceived exertion. So we did poll our athletes in regard to RPE on how hard they perceived it. But in this section right here, we actually measured how hard we perceived it as coaches. So depending on the period, how hard was each period perceived. And then training volume was our time, our time in minutes times our CRPE. So if it was 60 and our RPE was 1, our training volume is 60. Okay? And then the notes section was everything over here, depending on if it was voluntary, if the weather was bad, if we had to move inside, any note that may be important for us over the long term, we put in this section here. Okay. All right. Then we had basically a pivot table built off of our day log. And what we could do here is slice any city, basically any metric that we have at the top that we measured. And so this is the neat thing about pivot tables. We can go in and we can look at really anything that we want to. So you don't have to be this elaborate. You know, we could certainly remove all of this except the date and then some variables we want to look at over here. Maybe you want to add a column that looks at, you know, how many times you wore a certain shoe. You could certainly add that in here, but you can make this as detailed or as simple as you'd like. But the more columns you put in here, the more variables you put in at the top, the more slicers you can create over here and the more granular you can look at things. So this was just kind of looking at some different areas here. And what a pivot table does is it allows us to slice things up and look at some things. So this is an example of us at Lawrence when we were in Kansas. This was our Houston tournament. Okay, this is when we were practicing in Malibu, California, when we were in Lubbock. And you can slice anything based on anything you want. For example, here we have date, day, surface, period. I have it set just as session, so it grabs everything. Session, so it grabs everything. And then we have weather. Okay, but this is just looking at environmental factors right now. But I can basically create a slicer, which is basically a filter for anything that I would like. Okay, so that's the day log. The next thing that we have is a wellness data dump. So within wellness, I mentioned that we collected wellness at the beginning of a week, so after a series, and at the end of the training week, as we were getting ready to go into a series. And we basically just dumped this into a massive spreadsheet over time. I have taken athlete names off here for security reasons, but we have taken their names off there. Then we have wellness pivot. And what we would do here is just be able, just like our day pivot, we were able to go back through here and look at things in a more granular perspective. Now up here, whether, there's a lot of conflicting theories about it, but what we did was look at it in acute to chronic. And by putting this up top, what we can do by filtering different things, we can look at acute to chronic over time. If I want to look at it in an individual athlete, maybe I select one athlete here and pull out their information and look at them over time. I would have all their information and I can look at it in an acute to chronic process. If I want to grab the whole team, what I could do is, let's just take this out right here. I could look at it in that kind of way, okay? But what slicers allow me to do is look at it any way that I want to. Now, that's my wellness. Next thing I did was GPS. We used GPS, Catapult GPS S5 units, and like I said, all of our position athletes, so 8 guys in the field and a designated hitter. What we did was just dump all of that information over time into your standard data dump, and then we ran a GPS pivot. So in this case right here, same kind of deal. What we did here was look at it over time, and we built some basic little graphs out. So I can look at athletes over time and what they've done, and this visual allows me to get into my next step, maybe the most important step. Okay? And now these are not set in stone. These are not the end-all be-all. This is just what we wanted to look at on any given day. So if I have a problem, if something's popping up, let's just build something out so we can look at it visually. Okay? It's all about just looking at it. Think about your GPS as, or your data, not just GPS. Think about your data as looking at it visually, as with like a microscope. Okay, so in this case too, this is every single day that was worn. If we will, just don't pay attention to these because these may be out of order. What I've been doing is shifting these events dependent on the athlete, because some guys miss a little bit of time here and there, so their dates may be slightly different from one another, but they correspond to these. And if I was to produce a report, I would bring this over, my sprint range over, and I would make sure my dates corresponded with my opponent. But for this case, just looking at this, okay, so I have a specific athlete, let's say. I have a specific athlete. And then I look in here at the date, and these are just some measures that I looked at over time. It doesn't mean that's the only ones you can measure. And then these charts over here are plotted out based upon these numbers. Now, another way to ID some potential red flags that occurred, what we did was build an acute to chronic up top too. Now we set conditional formatting, okay, conditional formatting for the AC load based upon Tim Gabbett's above 1.2 threshold, and then this will turn red if it's above that. So let's look at this. This function is basically taking an average of a specific date range. Okay, for example, 1 week, 7 days. And then this one right here would be 28 days, or 4 weeks, 1 week, 4 weeks. And then we'll divide that acute by chronic, and then that will give us this number here. So to move that on any given day, we would just take, this, click on this, and I just basically move this area right here by coming down, dragging it down, and taking this, which is already set for the time period that we've taken. Remember this time period, if you study it a little bit, it doesn't really matter what you do. They recommend 7 and 28, which is basically just 1 week divided by 4 weeks, but you can kind of play with that on your own. And now I want to take this formula and I'm going to pull it across all the way, and I'm going to take the function, the formula's function, and I'm going to pull it. So now, like right now, before I pulled that function, I had 4 red flags. Now, as I update it to the most current data that's in, I don't have any red flags. In fact, I actually have a couple that's low. Now, if I think about this, if these are low, and especially if it's a 90% effort, that may actually be a red flag too. So if he's coming in low on sprint efforts, that may mean I need to actually add something when I come to maybe our warm-up, our pregame or pre-practice routine. But that's basically a red flag for me, even though it's not a red flag, okay? So basically just understanding how your data works, thinking about your data as it's an organism, okay? So I look at this information through my microscope, and I'm going to use past intuition, past experience, and just playing with this to be able to create a picture. Okay, so now this is important. All this is important for me, but I don't need to give this to coaches. You know, if you want to talk to recruits, if you want to do different things like that, you certainly can. But if you give this to coaches, they've got enough information in front of them where they don't need to continue to have to learn new variables. Now, one at a time, if you find something that's like specific to a sport, let's definitely go ahead. But as you're introducing this to coaches, let's keep it very simple. So let's go back over here and look at our coaches report. So what we'll do over here, and forgive the simplicity of this, but it is very simple on how this is done. Okay, now, all we're doing is giving a coach a readiness score. And I'm going to give a coach a readiness score of a 1, a 2, or a 3. If an athlete is 1, he's ready to go. She's ready to go. If they're 2, maybe that's yellow. They're very good. They're ready to go, but there may be something going on where they're not fully green. And then if an athlete receives a 3, it's actually a red flag. I'm going to show you kind of how we build that. So now all the information that a coach gets on any given athlete is their body weight compared to their spring average or semester average, a wellness score, whatever they reported. Okay, that's a cumulative wellness score. And then notes that we type in as coaches, okay, or sports scientists. Now our readiness right here comes from over here. Now here's the beautiful thing about it. So each one of these athletes, and I usually use a tab. Let's take this out. I usually use a tab over here where I just basically put a bunch of information. Okay, I put that information in there and I color it black so I don't touch it. It's not fancy. There's no formulas in here, but it's me organizing information. Now I can take that information and I can basically dump it over here. So now I line up body weights with athletes. I line up wellness, cumulative individual wellness scores with an athlete. Now what that does is populate it in this little area that I have boxed off. This is my body weight average that I will pull from my wellness pivot. So I will basically take all the athletes, I will select the entire year, and I will take that and put that body weight average right in here. Okay, now what I'm going to do based off of my information that I receive here, wellness and body weight, I'm going to go over here to the wellness, and for every one of these athletes, athlete A, athlete B, athlete C, D, all the way to, what is that, 7 Z's, I'm going to go score them in a binary way. Okay, so they're going to get a 1 or they're going to get a 0. 1 means, you know, it's a trigger. It's been triggered. Okay, so something about that score triggered a 1. A 0 means I have no concern and it did not trigger. So think about a light switch. It's either on or it's off. There's nothing else. Okay, so wellness. Athlete 1. Okay, so body weight today, you know, they're 200 pounds, actually 220, near 220. So they're not even 4 pounds down. So that's not really concerning. Wellness is an 8. So they actually get a 0. Okay. Next one, B. They are 1 pound off. They're 10, 0. Okay, the next one, they're 1 pound down, got an 8, 0. The next one, Okay, so we're actually 2 pounds down, and they're at 14 wellness. So something may be going on there. That's where I may go into their individual score and see which one is triggered. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's a really bad night's of sleep. But if there's multiple in there, which 14 on this wellness score probably is, I'm going to go ahead and flag them with a 1. Okay, 15. Okay, it's consistent body weight. But let's say, for example's sake, we'll just code these guys out. 15, we'll go there. 13, we will. 11, we won't. 13, we won't. And again, what I do is go in and look at these a little bit more in depth, and you'll be able to see which ones are potential red flags, which ones are not. And now what you're going to see as we tag these, our readiness score is actually receiving points over here. Now we're not done yet. Let's go back over here. Okay, so the move, we can also call this GPS. This is where if I have an athlete strapped to a GPS, this is where I'm going to give them. And I would go over here to my GPS pivot. Depending on the day, I look at here, and if there are red flags up top, let's say there's 3 red flags, that may warrant us giving a 1. So let's just run down through here and throw some binary coding up. So let's say these athletes had GPS on and they got a 1 or a 0. And let's just make it interesting. Let's go there. And now the coach. This is one of the most important things. This is from the relationship with the coach. This is from you knowing your athletes. This is where you provide a subjective score. So I have 2 objective measures and 1 subjective measure. So let's say athlete A, they have a bunch of tests that I know of. They have some other things going on, so I'll flag them with a 1. Athlete B, they're super high. They were maybe dancing in the weight room today. They were there early. They were hydrating. I saw them at the bank or the dining hall. They get a 0. Okay? Over here, next one, maybe they get a 0 too. Athlete D, let's say something's going on. This one, something's going on. If I saw them and maybe they were limping at practice or they were down at practice, they were worried about their performance, would flag them too. G, nothing, and then nothing. Now, once we get all these filled in for all of our athletes here, what's going to occur is over here, my readiness score terms, and these are all conditionally formatted. So now all the coach has to do is look like, oh, athlete E, it's a red flag, something's going on. And if I give a red flag over here, I'm always going to give a note for the coach. Just say, multiple tests, body weight. Obviously body weight's not an issue here. Let's say low gym aware values. Okay, for the red, let's say not the same. Concerned about, trip coming up. That's what we would provide the coaches. So now at the end of the day, all the coach has to do is look at this, and we have a quick picture of our score. So now I know as a coach, as a sport coach, what's the status today of my athletes? What's their body weight? How well are they? If someone asks me about some things, I have a score. Now I know the qualifiers. 5 is low, 5 is good. Closer to 25 is a little bit worse. So basically that's all we're looking at. So going back to this. This is kind of how we did it in 2019. One way, certainly not the only way. This is all based out of Excel. We used Google Docs to create our survey and to send out and to collect wellness information. We used Catapult S5 unit to capture movement profiles for athletes across the season, both practice and games, home and away. And we used simple clipboard and a stopwatch and a wristwatch. How long was every period? How hard was every period? And what was the name of every period? From here, what we're doing is just painting a picture of what the loading profile is for our athletes. Okay. Again, thank you for the time. And certainly this is not the only way to do it, but one way that we've had success.